Today, we're sharing a story that is incredibly personal, a story of persecution, but also of unbelievable resilience. This comes directly from the testimony of a woman named Pabitra Gautam. She was one of over 100,000 Lashampa people who were systematically driven out of Bhutan back in the early 1990s in a brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing. For her, it all started on one single night that changed absolutely everything. So picture this. It's past midnight, November 22nd, 1990. Suddenly, there's this violent banging on the door. When Pabitra opens it, she sees it. Her husband, Homnaf, and her stepson, Dio Duda, are already in handcuffs, being arrested by the army. In that instant, her entire world was shattered. The soldiers, they claimed it was just for some questioning, that they'd be back the very next day. But that was a lie. They weren't taken to a police station. Oh no. They were brought to a local school, a place that had been twisted into something truly sinister. Let's just pause on that for a second. A high school, a place where kids are supposed to learn and grow, was turned into a center for interrogation and torture. It's such a chilling sign, isn't it? It shows that absolutely no part of everyday life was safe from the state's campaign of terror. Pabitra wasn't allowed to see her husband. Not once. The only way she found out what was happening was through another inmate who was eventually released, and the stories he told were just horrific. The methods of torture were systematic, they were brutal. He was being interrogated about supposedly donating to a political party, and when he denied it, the beatings would start. This wasn't some random violence, it was a cold, calculated routine. Well, the torture just completely devastated his body. He had lost control of his bladder and rectum. He was even vomiting blood. He was an utterly broken man before they even moved him to the official prison near the capital. And believe it or not, his ordeal was still far from over. So while her husband was enduring all of this, Pabitra was left to somehow fend for herself and her children. Their village had basically become an occupied territory. Their new daily reality was just one of constant, gnawing fear. And she had 5 children to look after. 5. The oldest was just 10 years old, and the youngest was only 2. Imagine trying to raise them all alone, surrounded by the very soldiers who took their father, all while trying to hide your own terror from them. The army's presence wasn't just there. They were actively exploiting the villagers, demanding free food, taking their livestock. But then it got so much worse. A circular was issued, ordering villagers to send their girls and women to the army barracks at night for sexual abuse. It's horrifying. Pabitra herself only narrowly escaped this fate one night because the assistant village headman risked his own life to hide her. Along with all this physical terror, there was a bureaucratic one. The state created this document, something they called a voluntary migration form. It was designed to create this sick illusion of choice, while actually forcing its own citizens into exile. It's a question that really gets to the heart of this kind of persecution, doesn't it? I mean, how do you actually coerce someone into signing away their home, their land, their citizenship, their entire history, and then call it voluntary? Well, you give them an impossible choice. And this was the lie they used to do it. Officials came to her home and said, look, if you just sign this form, if you agree to leave Bhutan, we'll free your husband. They dangled the one thing she wanted more than anything in the world as bait to get her to give up everything else. But Pabitra refused. She stood her ground. She insisted she would only make a decision like that with her husband there beside her. She wouldn't let them take her picture for the migration papers. So when that psychological manipulation didn't work, they just resorted to brute force. An officer put a gun to her head. But even in that moment, with a gun pointed at her head, she confronted him. The officer had promised her husband would be waiting for her at the border if she just left, and her response just laid bare the entire cruel lie. It was an incredible act of defiance. And for her bravery, she was beaten. The officer struck her with his rifle. She collapsed, hit her head on a tree, and was knocked unconscious. But even then, she hadn't signed. She hadn't given in. But the pressure just became unbearable. They started threatening to burn her house down. She was finally forced to make a decision. This next part of her story covers those final, harrowing days in her own homeland. The cruelty was just relentless. She had to flee her home only to find her husband released but on his deathbed. He died from his injuries. And get this, while she was trying to conduct his funeral, the authorities sent another letter demanding she come in and complete the migration paperwork. They wouldn't even let her grieve in peace. So she fled. With her husband gone and the state literally hunting her down, she took her 5 kids and started this desperate journey on foot. They hid in relatives' houses, they walked for days on end, with her carrying her youngest children when they couldn't walk anymore. They even spent a night hiding in a forest cave to avoid army patrols, before they finally reached the border. Now, escaping Bhutan wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. It was really the beginning of a whole new chapter, life as a stateless refugee. But it was also the start of a long, long road towards healing and somehow building a new future from the ashes. For 17 years, a refugee camp in Nepal was home. 17 years. She raised all 5 of her children there, learning to sew clothes out of plastic sheets just to protect them from the rain and cold. Eventually, she even became a volunteer guard for the community. She just never, ever gave up. Then, in 2009, with support from the UNHCR, Pabitra and her family were resettled in Adelaide, Australia, and a whole new life began. I mean, just look at the contrast. From constant terror and loss in Bhutan, she has built a future that's defined by peace, by healing, and by community. She even owns her own home now. After she arrived in Australia, she was formally diagnosed with PTSD. And that diagnosis, it's more than just a medical term. It was a formal recognition that the scars from her experience weren't just physical. They were deep psychological wounds that needed care and time to heal. We're going to end with her own words. After everything she went through, losing her husband, the terror, the escape, all those years in a camp, this is the life she has claimed for herself. It is such a profound testament to her resilience, and it really leaves us with a critical question, doesn't it? How do we build a world where no one has to fight so incredibly hard just for the right to live in peace?